The twin suns of Avarian hung low over the horizon, swollen discs of molten light that bled gold and ember across the sky. Their radiance spilled over the royal citadel's crystalline towers, turning every spire into a blade of fire, every window into a sheet of liquid dawn. To most humans, the glare would have been punishing, too bright to endure for long without filters or shields. Captain Ryland Voss had stopped flinching years ago. The outer colonies had taught him how to adapt to worlds that did not care whether a person was built for them. Harsh light, thin air, gravity that pressed down like a stern hand. You learned to breathe anyway. You learned to keep moving anyway. Still, as he stood at the threshold of the throne chamber, the brightness was not. What tightened his throat? It was the knowledge heavy as armor and twice as suffocating, that he had willingly walked into the most dangerous hall in the galaxy and offered himself up without bargaining. The great doors loomed above him, a seamless slab of living crystal, veined with faint blue luminescence. The structure seemed less built than grown, as if the planet itself had exhaled and hardened into architecture. Even from here, Ryland could feel the low thrumming pulse in the stone, the quiet hum of power that made the air taste faintly metallic, like a coming storm. Behind his visor, sweat cooled along his temple. His ribs felt too tight for his lungs, each breath an effort he refused to let show. 2 luminous guards flanked him, tall and imposing iridescent beings clad in crystalline armor that caught the twin suns and fractured them into a shifting spectrum. Their helmets were smooth, expressionless, and so reflective that Ryland could see his own silhouette in them, a human in worn combat plating, paint-scarred, edges chipped, posture straight from habit more than confidence. His gloved hand rested on the crown of his helmet, fingers tracing an old scratch that had gouged through the plating. The mark was fresh enough that it still pulled his attention, still tugged his mind back to the explosion 2 days earlier. The screaming alarm, the buckling deck. The moment heat and force had thrown him like a rag doll through smoke and shrapnel. He should have died. He almost had. And yet, somehow, he was here alive, summoned, judged, and potentially executed by the queen of an empire older than human history. Ryland did not regret a single second of it, not after what he had done for the princess. The Lumina guards stood motionless, their long weapons angled down in ceremonial restraint. But Ryland could feel their scrutiny like a pressure against the back of his neck. They didn't understand him. They didn't understand why a human and outsider species, a short-lived flicker compared to Lumina lifespans, would risk everything for one of theirs. Truthfully, Ryland wasn't entirely sure he understood it either. Princess Aira of Avarian had been his friend, no more than his friend, though they had never spoken the words aloud. The space between them had always been crowded with what-ifs and unasked questions, with glances held to long and conversations that drifted, dangerously, toward honesty before one of them changed the subject. She was curious in a way most royals were not, eager to learn, eager to listen, warm without weakness, stubbornly compassionate, even when diplomacy demanded detachment. From the first day he'd been assigned as part of a joint security detail, she had treated him as a person rather than a tolerated primitive. She didn't speak down to him or around him. She asked his opinion and waited for his answer like it mattered. He had not meant to care. He had certainly not meant to care enough to break laws for her. But then she had been taken. The Voidorn marauders struck during what should have been a controlled diplomatic mission, an exchange of symbolic gifts. A carefully choreographed ceremony meant to keep fragile alliances from fracturing. The marauders came out of nothingness. Like a wound in space, a dreadnought with black hull plating that swallowed light, its flank bristling with boarding pods and weapon ports. Negotiations turned to chaos. Aira's escort fell. A containment shield failed. In the confusion, the marauders seized her not as a hostage in the human sense, but as leverage, as a living threat they could point at an empire's throat. The official response was slow. Committees debated. Councils weighed risk versus optics. The Avarian Empire, proud, ancient, precise, did what empires did when the stakes were political. It calculated. Ryland did not calculate. He stole a ship. He ignored orders. He crossed into luminous sovereign territory without authorization. Because there was no time to argue about borders when someone you cared about was screaming into the dark. He infiltrated the marauder dreadnought alone. He fought through bioengineered warriors whose bones were reinforced with alloy, whose blood steamed like coolant in the air. He crawled through service vents slick with condensation, slid past sensor nodes that pulsed like alien hearts, and took down guards in silent bursts of violence that left his arms shaking afterward. He found her in a holding chamber lined with damp organic material, as if the ship itself were alive and breathing around her. Aira was strapped into a restraint frame, bruised, pale, her luminous hair dull with sweat and grime. Her eyes, those strange, light-catching eyes of her people, were half-lidded with exhaustion. But when she saw him, something sparked in them that hurt more than any wound. "Ryland," she rasped. He didn't answer. He didn't trust his voice. He cut her free, lifted her as if she weighed nothing, and carried her while alarms screamed, and the ship shuddered under incoming fire. He got her out. He got her halfway to safety, and then the deck beneath them erupted. He'd flung him against a bulkhead hard enough that his vision went white. Metal screamed. His helmet crack split under the impact. For a moment, he thought that was it, that he'd done the impossible only to die choking on smoke. Then Aira's hands shaking, weak, but still determined, found his faceplate and pressed, steadying him. "Stay with me," she whispered, and that whisper dragged him back to breath, back to movement, back to survival. They escaped. Aira was returned to the citadel. The marauder vessel, damaged in the fighting, destabilized by Ryland's sabotage, was destroyed. And that, of course, was where politics sharpened its claws. The Avarian Empire had been negotiating with the marauders, trying to turn enemies into reluctant partners through treaties and concessions the marauders had never intended to honor. Those agreements, Ryland was certain of that, but certainty meant little in a court that thrived on procedure. Ryland's actions had violated military orders, trespassed into sovereign space, destroyed a vessel under diplomatic review, risked the balance between empires. He expected punishment, What he did not expect was a direct summons from Queen Serilith herself. Now, with the doors looming and the guards waiting, Ryland kept his posture calm and his hands visible. In any other context, his confidence might have been mistaken for arrogance. Here, it was simply the last thing he could control. The towering doors split open without a sound, releasing a gust of cool, perfumed air that washed over his sweat-stung skin. The scent was unfamiliar, something like mineral rain and crushed petals clean, and sharp enough to sting. The whole beyond glowed with cerulean light, as if the walls themselves breathed energy. Veins of luminance ran through the crystal floor beneath his boots, pulsing at a slow, steady rhythm. The air vibrated with restrained power, and Ryland's instinct, strained by war, honed by survival, recognized the feeling of a room filled with danger. Even if no one moved, he stepped inside. The throne chamber was vast, shaped like a cathedral carved by patient hands. Pillars rose like frozen waterfalls, their surfaces shifting with internal light. High above, the ceiling opened into a domed expanse of transparent crystal through which the twin suns painted the sky in layered fire. At the far end, upon a throne of living crystal that seemed to grow around her like an extension of her will, sat Queen Serilith, of Avarian, ruler of the Lumina, commander of one of the eldest interstellar empires. She was radiant and elegant, her form elongated and luminous, her robes trailing like starlight caught in fabric. Her skin held the subtle sheen of polished gemstone, and her eyes bright, ancient, burned with an intelligence that made Ryland feel like a child standing before a storm. Beside her stood Princess Aira, healed, restored, draped in royal silks that shimmered with shifting hues, her hair braided with thin strands of crystalline thread. Yet her hands were clasped too tightly, and worry shadowed her features despite her composure. When her gaze met Ryland's, relief softened her luminous eyes. It was brief. She had learned how to mask emotion in court, but he caught it, and it hit him harder than the heat outside. "Captain Ryland Voss," Queen Serilith said. Her voice did not need volume to command. It carried through the chamber like a chime struck in clear air, musical, precise, and impossible to ignore. "Step forward." Ryland obeyed, boots clicking against the crystal floor. He stopped at the base of the throne's crystalline steps, then lowered himself into a formal bow. "I stand prepared to accept judgment, Your Majesty," he said. A murmur rippled through the chamber. He didn't need to see the faces of the gathered nobles, commanders, and attendants to feel their surprise. Few humans ever spoke directly to the Queen. Fewer still spoke without trembling. Queen Serilith tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle worth her time. "You entered hostile territory without sanction," she said, each word placed like a blade. "You destroyed a vessel under diplomatic review. You risked the fragile balance between our empires, and you nearly died in the process." Her gaze sharpened, and Ryland felt it like a weight pressing into his bones. "Tell me, Captain," she said. "Why?" Ryland raised his head. He did not look away. "Because Princess Aira's life mattered more than the marauders' negotiations," he answered. "They were never going to honor their agreements. They only wanted leverage." His jaw tightened. Aira was that leverage, a flicker crossed. The Queen's face anger, quick and bright, not directed at him, Ryland realized, but at the marauders, at the insult of their audacity. And yet, Serilith said slowly, "You knew the consequences of acting alone." "Yes," Ryland said, "and I would do it again." The chamber inhaled as one. Gasps broke the silence like brittle glass. Aira pressed a hand to her lips, as if to steady herself. Her eyes glimmered with something fierce and fragile. Queen Serilith rose. The air changed. Ryland had faced war machines, predators, pirates with nothing to lose. But this was different. Her presence filled the chamber the way gravity filled a planet inescapable, absolute. "You are either the bravest human who has ever lived," she said, "or the most foolish." Ryland swallowed, then managed, probably both. To his surprise, the Queen's lips curved not in mockery, but in something close to amusement. It was a small expression on a face carved from centuries of restraint, and it unsettled him more than anger would have. Aira stepped down from the dais, moving with the grace of her people, but with urgency that betrayed her emotion. "Mother," she said, voice tight, "he saved my life. The marauders were going to." Her words broke. She drew a breath, shoulders lifting with the effort of control. "They were going to use me as a weapon," she finished, quieter now. Ryland risked everything to stop them. The Queen's gaze softened as she looked at her daughter. The hall fell into a silence so deep Ryland could hear the faint hum in the walls. The distant whisper of energy through crystal veins. Queen Serilith descended the steps and approached Ryland. Her robes made no sound against the floor, but the air around her seemed to ripple, charged with power and authority. Ryland held still. He did not step back. He did not reach for a weapon he did not have. When she stopped before him, she lifted one hand. Then, unexpectedly, she placed it over his heart. Ryland froze. Her palm was cool through his armor, and the touch carried a strange sensation, not pressure, but resonance, as if her gesture aligned with something within him, as if she could feel the frantic beat of his human heart and found it acceptable. "In our culture," Queen Serilith said quietly, "this gesture is reserved for those who have acted with devotion beyond duty." She held his gaze. "You risked your life for my child when even our own commanders hesitated," she continued. "You placed compassion above politics." Her voice sharpened only slightly on the last word, as if politics itself was an unpleasant taste. "For that," she said, "your fate must be decided not by law, but by honor." Ryland blinked, stunned. "I don't," he swallowed. "I don't understand." "You expected death," Serilith said, removing her hand. "Or imprisonment." He did. He had been ready for it, had walked in here already half-ghost, resigned to whatever punishment came. Instead, the Queen said, turning toward the assembled court, "I offer you something far more profound." She lifted her voice not louder, but broader, filling every corner of the chamber. "Captain Ryland Voss of Earth," she declared, "you are hereby granted the title of Starbound Guardian, the highest honor bestowed upon an off-worlder." Whispers erupted, sharp and disbelieving. "You are given citizenship within the Avarian Empire," Serilith continued, full diplomatic immunity, and the right to stand among the royal protectors. Ryland felt as if the floor had vanished beneath him. His mouth opened, but the words tangled. "Your Majesty," he managed, hoarse. I don't deserve." "You do," Aira said softly, stepping to his side. Her voice was steady now, though her eyes were bright. "My mother sees it." Queen Serilith's gaze cut back to him, and the amusement from earlier was gone, replaced by something sharper and far more serious. "But be warned, Captain," she said. "This honor binds you to us." The court quieted, listening. "Your actions from this moment forward will reflect not only upon you," Serilith continued, "but upon my family, my empire, and the fragile peace we defend." Ryland straightened, something hot and steady igniting in his chest, not pride, not arrogance, but purpose. A new weight settled on his shoulders, and for the first time it did not feel like a chain. "I won't fail you," he said. Serilith's eyes gleamed. "I know," she replied. "That is why I chose this fate for you." Aira's smile broke through her worry at last, bright, relieved, grateful. "Welcome to Avarian," she whispered to him, as if saying it quietly made it more real. As the formalities unfolded, oaths spoken in the musical cadence of the Lumina tongue. Ceremonial seals pressed into crystal. Witnesses named. Ryland stood like a man caught between two lives. One where he was a soldier bound by human commands. Another where he was now something else entirely. An outsider accepted, not as a guest, but as a guardian. When the ceremony finally concluded, the chamber slowly dispersed. Nobles drifted away in murmuring clusters, their curiosity sharp as knives. Guards resumed their watch. Advisors leaned close to the Queen, already turning honor into logistics. Ryland remained where he was, heart still beating too fast, hands not quite sure what to do with themselves. Aira touched his arm gently. The contact was light, barely there, but it anchored him more than the throne's proclamations. "You really would have died for me," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Wouldn't you?" Ryland turned to her. In the cerulean glow, her eyes looked like captured starlight. He did not hesitate. "Yes," he said. Aira's expression softened, and something deep and tender surfaced, something she had always kept hidden under royal discipline. "Then, I'm glad my mother changed your fate," she whispered, and her breath hitched. "Because she swallowed, eyes shimmering. "I don't want a life where you aren't in it." Outside, the twin suns finally slipped beneath the horizon, and violet twilight spilled through the crystal dome, scattering color across the whole like shattered amethyst. Ryland Voss, once an ordinary human soldier, one more name in a long list of expendable pilots, stood at the threshold of a destiny he had never imagined. He had risked everything for the princess, and the Queen's response had not just spared him. It had bound him irrevocably to the royal line, to an empire of living crystal and ancient power, and to the one person who had made him believe, for the first time in his life, that he might be more than what he was ordered to be. In the hush of the new night, with Aira's hand still on his arm, Ryland finally let himself breathe fully. He was not condemned. He was chosen.